Marilyn Monroe wore a low-cut red dress to a party and, the next morning, a columnist complained publicly. Episodes like this were frequent in the actress's career, as her image was simultaneously exploited by the studios and condemned by the moralistic press of the era in which she lived and worked. Hedy Lamarr, whose scientific discoveries helped make technologies like Wi-Fi possible in 1938. Beyond being a Hollywood star, the Austrian actress co-invented a frequency-hopping system for torpedoes during the war, whose principles underpin modern wireless communications throughout the entire world. Peter Dinklage in college in the late 1980s, long before fame. The actor studied drama at Bennington College and spent years in low-budget independent productions in New York. He would only achieve worldwide recognition roughly 2 decades later as Tyrion Lannister in the acclaimed series Game of Thrones. Rick Astley meeting Princess Diana in 1988. The singer was at the height of his fame after Never Gonna Give You Up had dominated world charts the previous year. Diana was then the most photographed public figure on the planet and frequently attended charity events with British music stars. Shakira in the 1990s. The Colombian singer had released her first albums as a teenager with modest success, before Pies Descalzos transformed her into a Latin American phenomenon in 1995. Years later, she would conquer the English-language market and become one of the best-selling Latin artists ever. Slash in 1982, before Guns N' Roses was formed, when he was still known simply as Saul. Saul Hudson was born in London and grew up in Los Angeles, the son of parents connected to the music industry. His grandmother gave him his first guitar, an instrument he would master unmistakably years later. A young Dolly Parton with her husband Carl Dean, married since 1966. Their union lasted nearly 6 decades and is considered among the most private in the entertainment world. Dean almost never appeared in public, and Parton often joked that he had attended only one of her concerts in his entire life. Mike Tyson, walking with his tiger in the 1990s. The boxer owned 3 Bengal tigers at his property, purchased at the height of his fortune. Years later, he admitted that keeping the animals was a dangerous and extremely costly mistake, spending roughly $70,000 a year on each of them. Ozzy Osbourne and his wife Sharon in 1984. Sharon took over managing her husband's career after he was fired from Black Sabbath, rescuing him from alcoholism and transforming him into an enormously successful solo artist. Their personal and professional partnership would span more than 4 decades. Louis Armstrong plays for his wife Lucille before the Pyramids of Egypt in 1961. The trumpeter traveled the world as an American cultural ambassador, performing in dozens of countries. The image became one of the most reproduced of his career, symbolizing the global reach of American jazz music. Parents take to the streets in support of New York Pride in 1974. The movement of relatives of LGBT people began organizing during that period, giving rise to support groups that would become fundamental. The presence of family members at parades lent social legitimacy to a then marginalized cause. This extraordinary photograph was taken by a 16-year-old girl who smuggled her camera into a Queen concert in 1978. That year, the band released Jazz and toured stadiums. Amateur audience recordings like this one are today valuable documents in the history of major rock concerts worldwide. A police officer in New York stops traffic simply so a cat can carry her kittens across the street. Scenes like this one, captured by newspaper photographers, became classics of American urban photojournalism, offering a moment of human relief amid the frequently heavy news of the day. A Jewish woman and a Palestinian woman protesting together in 1973, 1992, and 2001. The sequence of images across nearly 3 decades documents the persistence of joint pacifist movements, which insisted on dialogue even during the most violent periods of the conflict in the Middle East. an underwater operator in the 1930s. Divers of that period wore heavy copper helmets and suits connected to air pumps at the surface. The work was extremely dangerous, with constant risk of decompression sickness, and essential for port construction and salvage operations across the world. Elijah Wood and Macaulay Culkin in 1993, the year they appeared together in the thriller The Good Son. Culkin was then the most famous child actor in the world after Home Alone, while Wood was beginning the career that would lead him decades later to the role of Frodo in The Lord of the Rings. Shoeshine Girls listened to a Civil War veteran recount his war stories in the 1920s. During that period, the last combatants of the 1861 to 1865 conflict were elderly and treated as living relics, frequently invited to relate their experiences to curious audiences across the United States. George Lucas before computer graphics in 1984. The filmmaker had founded Lucasfilm's computer division, which would later become Pixar, sold to Steve Jobs in 1986. His obsession with technical innovation would transform the film industry in ways even he did not foresee at that particular time. The future Pope Leo XIV in 1982. Before reaching the papacy, Robert Prevost served for decades as a missionary in Peru, where he worked in poor communities and became Bishop of Chiclayo. His pastoral trajectory and contexts of poverty would profoundly shape his vision of the Catholic Church. Sophia Loren's remark about preferring to eat pasta and drink wine rather than be a size 0, recorded in 1965. The Italian actress was a symbol of Mediterranean beauty in an industry already pressuring women toward extreme thinness, and her frank stance on food became emblematic across the decades. In 1989, the cast of Ghostbusters: The Sioux appeared on Oprah's program to promote the film. In the audience sat a young Chris Farley, still unknown, who years later would become one of the most explosive comedians on Saturday Night Live before dying prematurely at 33 years of age. A young Dolly Parton beside her husband Carl Dean, married since 1966. The two met on her first day in Nashville and maintained an extraordinarily long marriage by entertainment industry standards. Dean ran an asphalt paving business and completely avoided any form of public exposure throughout life. Vietnam War protesters are arrested in 1971. That year saw the largest mass detention operation in American history, when roughly 12,000 people were arrested in Washington during protests that attempted to shut down the functioning of the federal capital of the United States entirely. Courtney Cox on the set of Friends in 1994, the year the series premiered. The program would become one of the greatest television phenomena of all time, broadcast in more than 100 countries. Cox was the best-known cast member at the time, thanks to Bruce Springsteen's Dancing in the Dark video. Buster Keaton cleaning windows in 1920. The comedian was known for personally performing all of his stunts, many of them extremely dangerous. His impassive face earned him the nickname the Great Stone Face, and his work would influence entire generations of filmmakers throughout the world. Members of an elite unit led by a Choctaw descendant prepare for an operation. Native American soldiers served in high proportions in the armed forces, and native code talkers were crucial in both world wars for transmitting messages in languages the enemy could never decipher or translate. Wives of the Apollo 8 astronauts react upon hearing their husbands' voices for the first time after the lunar orbit. The December 1968 mission was the first to carry humans into orbit around the Moon, and the loss of signal while passing behind the far side created moments of unbearable tension. A Child's Motorcycle from 1927. Miniature motorized toys were luxury products in that period, accessible only to wealthy families. They reflected society's growing fascination with mechanization and the desire to introduce children early to the emerging automobile culture of the 20th century. Members of the Dutch resistance celebrate upon hearing news of Adolf Hitler's death in May 1945. The Netherlands had endured 5 years of occupation, including the Hunger Winter of 1944, which killed thousands of civilians. Liberation arrived just weeks before the definitive end of the war, forging the anchor chain of the Titanic in 1910. The chain was produced by Hingley and Sons in England, and each link weighed more than 200 pounds. The work was done by hand by teams of blacksmiths in brutal heat, demanding extraordinary strength and precision from every worker involved. Astronaut Neil Armstrong making pizza in 1969, the year he became the first human being to walk on the moon. After returning, Armstrong deliberately avoided the spotlight, refusing interviews and appearances, and went on to teach aerospace engineering at the University of Cincinnati for several years. Gunnar Kaysen, a Norwegian musher, and his lead dog Balto, who delivered diphtheria antitoxin to Nome, Alaska. The 1925 Serum Run covered more than 600 miles in extreme conditions and saved the town from an epidemic. Balto received a statue in Central Park that still stands there today. Bob Dylan and his girlfriend in 1963. The young woman was Suze Rotolo, who appears beside him on the cover of the album The Freewheelin' Bob Dylan. Rotolo had a profound influence on the singer, introducing him to political activism and the visual arts during his formative years in New York. Rick Astley's father, Ossie Astley, celebrates Never Gonna Give You Up, reaching #1 on the British charts. The song topped the charts in 25 countries during 1987 and would gain unexpected new life decades later as the basis of the Internet phenomenon known worldwide as Rick-rolling. In 1973, a home birth brought friends celebrating on the porch when a girl with a camera appeared. Home births regained popularity in the United States during that period, driven by movements that criticized the excessive medicalization of childbirth in hospitals across the country at that time. The Beatles in 1957, when George was 14, John 16, and Paul 15, performing at weddings. The group was still called the Quarrymen and played skiffle, a popular genre in Britain. Ringo Starr would only join the band 5 years later, completing the definitive and legendary lineup. A rigger works on one of the world's largest bridges, the Sydney Harbour Bridge, in 1971. The bridge, opened in 1932, requires constant painting and structural maintenance. Workers operate more than 100 meters above the water in one of Australia's most dangerous and emblematic occupations. First, second, and third place winners in the Miss Correct Posture contest pose with trophies and their X-rays in 1956. The contest was promoted by American chiropractic associations and rewarded the best-aligned spines, reflecting the post-war obsession with health, hygiene, and bodily conformity. A scene from Hook, Steven Spielberg's 1991 film. The production reimagined Peter Pan as an adult lawyer who had entirely forgotten his childhood in Neverland. Robin Williams starred alongside Dustin Hoffman and Julia Roberts in one of the most star-studded casts of the entire 1990s decade, a London pub in 1967. British pubs of that period were undergoing profound cultural transformation with the arrival of new music, new generations, and shifting social customs. They remained, nonetheless, the absolute center of community life in neighborhoods across the entire United Kingdom. Lucille Ball, in the late 1930s. Before becoming the greatest star of American television comedy with I Love Lucy, Ball worked for years as a model and actress in small Hollywood roles. She would later become the first woman to run a major production studio in the United States of America. Tim Burton's Halloween costume in 1967. The future filmmaker grew up in Burbank, California, obsessed with monster movies and dark stories. That childhood sensibility would translate into works such as Beetlejuice, Edward Scissorhands, and The Nightmare Before Christmas decades afterward. Kris Kristofferson tells Sinead O'Connor not to let the bastards get her down at Madison Square Garden in 1992. The Irish singer was booed by the audience after tearing up a photo of the Pope on television weeks earlier. Kristofferson publicly supported her during one of her career's hardest moments. Dee Snider speaking against censorship and the PMRC before the United States Senate in 1985. The Twisted Sister vocalist was summoned alongside Frank Zappa and John Denver and surprised senators with an articulate and coherent testimony that dismantled arguments for mandatory record labeling. Mildred and Richard Loving, whose marriage and subsequent legal battles ended legal restrictions on interracial marriage in the United States. The Supreme Court decision in 1967, in Loving versus Virginia, invalidated the anti-miscegenation laws still in force in 16 states at that time. A luxury lawnmower with air conditioning from the 1950s. Extravagant inventions like this reflected the technological optimism and consumerism of post-war America when manufacturers competed to add comfort and mechanical novelties to virtually every household product available on the market. The variation in donut hole size over the years between 1927 and 1948. The curious record documents how food production standards changed during the Depression and the war, when ingredient shortages led manufacturers to discreetly adjust the proportions and sizes of their products. In 1973, Marlon Brando refused his Academy Award for The Godfather and sent Sachin Littlefeather to protest in his place against Hollywood's treatment of indigenous peoples. The activist was booed by part of the audience, and the episode became one of the tensest moments in Oscar history. Navy musician Graham Jackson plays Goin' Home as Franklin D. Roosevelt's funeral train passes. The 1945 photograph, with tears streaming down the accordionist's face, became one of the most moving images of American national mourning and of the country's relationship with that particular president. Prince skating on his private tennis court, photographed by Jeff Katz in 1989. The musician was known for his eccentricity and for maintaining an extremely private life at his Paisley Park estate in Minnesota, where he lived, recorded, and held surprise parties for invited guests at all hours. Miles Davis hosts the group Emerson, Lake and Palmer at his home on West 77th Street in New York in August 1971, photographed by David Garr. Davis was then in his electric phase, having revolutionized jazz with Bitches Brew and moving ever closer to the languages of rock and funk music. Annie Oakley, the legendary sharpshooter, fires over her shoulder using a hand mirror in 1899. The trick was among the most impressive in her repertoire at Buffalo Bill's Wild West show. Oakley could hit tiny targets at great distances and was never surpassed in precision by anyone in her lifetime. The Traveling Wilburys in 1988, From Left to Right, Bob Dylan, Tom Petty, George Harrison, Jeff Lynne, and Roy Orbison. The supergroup was born almost by accident during a recording session and produced one of the most celebrated albums of the decade, uniting 5 rock legends as complete equals. Mariah Carey and then-boyfriend Derek Jeter in 1998. The singer had just divorced Tommy Mottola and was in a phase of reasserting her artistic autonomy. Jeter was the biggest star of the New York Yankees, then in the dynasty that would win 4 World Series titles within a span of 5 years. The late Hank Williams, who died at 29 years old in 1952 as a result of alcoholism. Despite his brief life, he recorded more than 30 songs that reached the charts and is considered the father of modern country music, influencing virtually every artist in the genre who followed.